Hello, and welcome to the Wedding Dish Podcast. Grab your fork and knife and take a seat at our table as we dish on all things wedding. You'll hear stories and tips from real couples and wedding professionals about love, life, and entrepreneurship. I am Sarah Alapin, the host of The Wedding Dish and CEO of Photos from the Hardy and District Bliss. And behind me, I have my Snorosaurus Rex, Clouseau, the French Bulldog Bud, who just loves to hang out in his podcast chair and snore like an old man. So I today have a very fun guest with me, a fellow photographer, and he actually specializes in many things, but one of the things I love that he does very, very well is proposal photography. So we're going to be talking today about proposal photography with Chris Ferenzi, the photographer behind Chris Ferenzi Photography. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Glad to be here again.
Yes, you are a returning guest. He came on in season 4, actually, which wasn't very long ago. Now that I think about it,
should make it a seasonal thing, just so you have some input, advice, and wisdom from Chris Ferenzi every season.
I mean, I feel like we could make that happen.
We can maybe do an episode just on dogs at weddings. I've been thinking about that. We could bring Katie in.
That would be fun. That is a topic that I've been wanting to cover with Katie, who is the CEO of Paw Inclusive, because she does dog wrangling at weddings sometimes. She also does dog boarding and all kinds of stuff like that. But yeah, Chris and I both love dogs. He has a little, what did you call her? A Puerto Rican street dog? Is that what you referred to her as?
That's like an official designation. She's a Puerto Rican street dog. Street dog is like the official designation. Basically, she's a super mutt. She was born in Puerto Rico and did an ancestry test, and it was like indeterminate back to the grandparents, the grand dog parents. So there's really no way to know what she is. It had a little bit of dachshund and actually had some mini schnauzer in there, but it also had some lab, which is odd because she's 15 pounds and, not very lab-like.
She is so stinking cute. Like,
she is cute. She is very cute.
I feel like she should be a breed of dog.
She should. And I mean, she's been great as a model for me. When I practice studio lighting, I just kind of plop her right there and use her as a model to get my lighting all set up.
Her name is Jadzia, by the way, for those of you out there who have not had the pleasure of meeting her.
And she's named after a character from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So that's a deep cut right there.
Yep.
I think only 5 people ever have realized or understood the reference when I told them her name. And I know it's only 5 because it's only 5. I counted them with my fingers. So I remember them all.
Is Larry in that group? My friend Larry that you met in LA?
Yes, which is to be expected since he is the source for all things Trek.
He is Dr. Trek, Larry Nemeczek.
So if he didn't know the reference, then I would have been highly suspicious of his Star Trek knowledge claims. But he passed the test. Yes, he passed the test.
I love it. Well, I'm really glad that you're here. I'm really excited to be talking with you about surprise proposals. So let's dish. So first of all, let's start with the very, very basics here. So when you're, and by you, I mean not you, Chris, but you as in listener, when our listeners are choosing a surprise proposal location, what are some thoughts, tips, suggestions you have surrounding that?
Well, I have a list of locations that I've shot at before and locations that I'd like to shoot at that I sort of send over to prospective clients. They include the National Mall, all the different monuments, various parks around the city, like Meridian Hill Park, which is very popular, National
Love Meridian Hill
Arboretum,
Park.
museums, which were easier to shoot at and in before the pandemic, but
Yeah.
those were always good spots. If it was raining, inclement weather, you could do the proposal inside the museum. So I recommend that as like a backup location if the weather was bad, but it's harder to do now, like I said. The waterfront in Alexandria or Georgetown, a lot of people are attached to the idea of a waterfront proposal, either because they're into sailing, kayaking, or they just like the general vibe of sunset on the water. So some of those options, Jones Point Lighthouse, for example, which is something you showed me actually when I was helping you at a wedding.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yep, the Jones Point Lighthouse. It's in what's that park? I
It's in
forget.
Alexandria, in Jones Point Park.
Well, yeah, there we go. Jones Point Park in Alexandria. Um, that is an awesome spot. I've recommended that, and so far I've done like 4 proposals there, and every time it's awesome. Plus, I'm rambling here, but plus it's also an interesting spot for photography because you have like a classical look with the lighthouse, and the park also is underneath the 495 bridge, and which is really architecturally interesting. So I always try to work in the curves and angles of the bridge, getting some cool silhouettes and just interesting compositions. So I like that location because it has both sides of my type of my preferences for shooting, so we can capture everything for the couple. Um, but yeah, going back to how to choose a location. First, it depends on the couple's um, preference in terms of the level of how public they want their proposal to be. Some couples are more private than others. Some people love the idea of a crowd of people clapping and congratulating them after the proposal and filming their proposal with their iPhones, and then they send the videos, they airdrop the videos to them afterwards. Um, in that case, probably the best spot for that in DC is on the National Mall at the Lincoln Memorial or the Jefferson Memorial. Those are usually where there are the most people.
Supreme Court's a good one for that too.
Supreme Court, yes, there's not nearly as many people there as the Jefferson and the Lincoln. The Lincoln's probably the most popular tourist spot, and there's always tons of people there. So if you want a proposal and you want a huge audience, that's where you want to go. Supreme Court's really nice, and there's always like a couple tourists there at all, pretty much any time of the day. So if you want less of an audience and a little more privacy, that's also a nice spot. But also on the National Mall, you have the DC War Memorial, which is sort of nestled in a little forested area. Not many people know about on the National Mall. That's a little more private, but you still have tourists. So pretty much anywhere on the National Mall is not somewhere you want to propose if you're uncomfortable with other people watching. So it's definitely more public. So if you're okay with that, definitely propose on the National Mall. Another reason some people propose in the National Mall is because either they met in DC or they have another reason for wanting to capture the DC feel. Maybe they're getting married in Ohio or something because they're from Ohio, but they met in DC. So they want to capture what's quintessentially DC in the background of the proposal photos. In which case, I would recommend the National Mall because that is quintessentially DC. You see that, anyone in the world will know that's in Washington DC.
Yeah.
So that's in terms of the National Mall. There's also, if you want to be more private with your proposal, there's a couple gardens around the city that I recommend a lot. Bishop's Garden at the National Cathedral. It's generally pretty empty, except on the weekends during the day. But I usually recommend a sunset proposal. I recommend some sunset proposals regardless of the day.
Agreed.
But sunset proposals at Bishop's Garden are really nice because there's very few people there. There's also something I recently discovered called the Tregarin Conservancy.
Oh yeah, in Georgetown.
No. That's I think you're thinking of what's it, Tudor Place. The Tregarin Conservancy is up near the National Cathedral.
I think I'm just wrong in my DC geography.
It's okay. I didn't know it existed until someone was like, "I want to propose here," and I'm like, "Okay, let's propose there." It's basically in the middle of the woods. So there's like complete privacy. The guy who was proposing wanted to do a little picnic, so we set up a picnic beforehand. Well, actually, his friends set up the picnic beforehand, and then they arrived and had a little picnic, and then the proposal happened. So that's a great spot if you're interested in. Well, if you're not interested in it being a public proposal.
Yeah.
So those are things to consider, like whether or not you want to have it to be a public or private proposal, whether or not you have a specific attachment to DC, in which case you do monuments, and there's options for like a rain plan, which are in the museums, and even inside Lincoln Memorial is one of my favorite spots for rain. So you have backup locations as well as primary locations.
Yeah, definitely. It's also, so speaking in terms of like choosing the location, what recommendations would you have regarding, the logistics of getting your significant other to go to this place?
Well, there's a couple different ways to do that. A lot of the time, it's hey, let's go out to dinner. Let's have a nice dinner. Near the National Mall, which is kind of funny because there's really no restaurants near the National Mall. Actually,
Nope.
I wrote up a big list talking about the restaurants that were closest to the National Mall, and the nearest one's like a 15-minute walk. But regardless, it's a good cover story, like a date night, and then hey, let's go walk on the National Mall, which is a romantic thing to do in the evening. Um, at around sunset, which is again my favorite time for proposals. So that's a good way to get them there. I mentioned having a picnic earlier in one of the gardens. That's a good way to do it. Hey, let's just go have a picnic. If you don't picnic regularly, it might be a little weird. So you might want to use that only if you sort of picnic. On this isn't the only time you picnicked ever in your relationship. So a couple recently, he proposed in the morning. Actually, they usually go jogging on around the tidal, not the tidal basin, the reflecting pool. So he proposed. They were both in gym clothes, which is kind of funny. But he proposed to her on their run. So it's something that they would normally do. So she would really have no idea it was going to happen. So yeah, he proposed to her, and they were both kind of sweaty. It was really funny, and they were both into it. So that was great. Um,
I kind of love that because it's just really them.
Exactly. Yeah. You want to do something that's you. Like, you don't want to just pick something out of the blue. Like I said, if you don't have a picnic in some random spot, because then it'll be a
Or
huge dip.
start the precedent that you are a picnicker in
Yeah.
advance.
Yeah. Like, if you want to propose in a year, just start the picnics, the monthly picnics, a year in advance. And then by the time you propose, you'll be picnickers.
I love that. Those are some great suggestions. So you've said a couple times, and I suspect I know the answer, but let's have you share with our listeners. Um, why is sunset your favorite time for proposals?
There's like an a disagreement, a friendly disagreement among most photographers whether or not sunrise or sunset is the best lighting. Both have a golden hour, which is the best lighting right before the sun rises and a little bit after the sun rises, or like an hour before sunset. I prefer sunset lighting because, well, let's be honest, I don't want to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to
Yeah,
do a
we're not early risers
proposal shoot.
here.
Um, but I don't know. I like the quality of light in the evening more, and the sun sets in the west, and that provides lighting on the Washington Monument in a way that looks awesome when you're shooting from the Lincoln Memorial, which is probably my most popular spot. You have nice warm backlighting. It's not too bright. If it was middle of the day, you have too much backlighting and it doesn't really look great. But sunset backlighting of the Washington Monument from the Lincoln Memorial looks fantastic. So that's why I like the sunset, because you have that nice golden light, and just the direction of it is easier to work with from the National Mall.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I also think because you and I are both Nikon users, and now this is a dig deep thing that most people wouldn't really like think too much about, but we are Nikon users, and the way that Nikons capture, I prefer sunset, whereas the way Canon captures, I prefer sunrise.
Yeah, all the different cameras, all different camera companies and models, even models within Nikon capture colors slightly differently. But I think you're right. I mean, I stick with Nikon because I like the way it captures, captures
Yeah,
light. As a photographer, that's what you should be focused on, how something captures the light.
yeah,
And also,
absolutely.
unrelated to that, ergonomics. I'm just so used to Nikon ergonomics. That's neither
Yeah,
here nor there, but that's
I'm
another
super
reason.
jealous of the wheel they have on the back on Canon, but
Yeah,
as a
I've always
lefty, I can't use their menu. It's like not it doesn't work with being a left-handed person, and adjusting the aperture and shutter speed, having to like hold any sort of button while doing
yeah.
that is just not with my right hand. It's just not coordinated enough. Everything's backward.
I do agree about the wheel because Nikon has always had this little. It's the shape of a wheel, but it's like a four-way button, and like to scroll through pictures, you have to like either push the button really really fast or hold it down, and then it doesn't really move through the pictures quickly. It just moves slowly, but automatically, slowly. Canon, you just spin the dial and you're back like 50 pictures. So I'm jealous of that.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Me
But
too.
another reason I like, at least in my experience, I don't know how the newer camera models handle dynamic range, but the Nikon, the base ISO of Nikon is usually 64 in the higher end cameras, whereas for Canon it's 100. And even between 100 and 64, I noticed a difference between the dynamic range, which essentially means how much detail you can capture in a single exposure in the highlights and in the shadows. So the higher the dynamic range, the more information you have in the image to work with, and that's nice. I keep going back to the Lincoln Memorial because it's one of my favorite spots. Sometimes I do proposals during the day from inside the Lincoln Memorial with the background as the Washington Monument, and if it's middle of the day, it's full sun overhead illuminating the background. And inside the Lincoln Memorial, it's a lot darker. So you have to be conscious of how the background is going to look, because if you expose other people in the Lincoln Memorial, the background is going to be completely washed out. So the way I handle that is I shoot super low ISO 64 to get the most dynamic range. I expose closer to the background than interior because you can recover your shadows, whereas you can't really recover blown highlights. So
Yeah.
this is a tip for the photographers if they want to
Yeah.
shoot in that particular spot. Shoot at the ISO with your highest dynamic range and expose more for the background than the foreground, and then you can just bring up the shadows in post production. Sometimes it's just so bright, even that doesn't work. So depending on the situation, I might do like a bracketed exposure. So I'll set my camera up to do plus minus a third stop. So you just hold the button down, you get one exposure, and then the next click is automatic. You get minus a third, then a plus a third stop, and then I just do an HDR composite in Lightroom or Photoshop after the fact. So that's another way in really really bright conditions. When the couple's in shade and the background's really bright to get a nice composition. Because if you're proposing in that specific spot in the Lincoln Memorial, you want to know the Washington Monument is there. You don't want to know that a bright sort of fuzzy, super white version is in the background that you can't really make out.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Great suggestions. Um, all right. So we've got our location, we've got kind of our cover story, and we've got our time of the day. Let's talk a little bit about I guess let's stay in time of the day for 1 second and talk about night proposals.
Ah, yes. I'll just say right off the bat that this is why you don't want your friend or, a friend of a friend who knows how to use the camera to be shooting your proposal at night. And when I say night and when you say night, it means after the sun sets. So
Yes.
it's dark out. There's no golden light. The sun is below the horizon. It's dark.
Yeah.
Um, there's a couple ways to handle to handle that. The first thing I recommend is, again, going back to the Lincoln Memorial is one of the most popular spots, but there's a reason because it's so popular. It's super versatile. You can either have it is the background, the Washington Monument is the background. You can be inside, you can be outside, so it's covered for the rain, and there's just so many different benefits to shooting there. But at nighttime, if you're inside, it's pretty well lit along the side corridors. I don't know if you can call them corridors, but the open areas along the sides of the monument that are covered behind the columns. That's I mean, it's not super bright. You have to sort of push your camera to the higher ISO and the lower shutter speed. I think when I was there, I did a surprise proposal there on New Year's Eve a couple of years back. It was like 15 degrees out. Awful idea, but the guy wanted to do that, so I was like, okay. But I think my exposure was like f1.4, 50th of a second, ISO like 5,000. So it's definitely
That's tough.
But if they were if they were outside the monument in just darkness, even if you shot super high ISO, like say 25,000, pushing your camera to the extreme limit, there's no light for it to work with. So you just have this weird sort of flat ambient darkness where you can sort of make them out, but it's not good. So that my first recommendation is just obviously to do it somewhere where there is illumination of some sort. But if they want to do it elsewhere, I had a couple. I didn't have a couple. I had a guy who wanted to propose. The couple doesn't generally want to propose together, so the guy wanted to propose at the Georgetown waterfront in a spot where there was absolutely no light whatsoever. So I was like, okay, we can make it work. I sort of warned them in situations like this. I'm like, it's dark. It's going to be a little more challenging in this particular spot because there's no light at all. And you'll get fewer pictures because in the dark, it can take a little longer to get to focus the image properly. And, it's just, you could have blurry images, which will be not useful to them. But in a situation like that, I will light the proposal with my off-camera flash. So I arrive early and I set up a light stand, sort of hidden. It's kind of hard to hide a light stand, but I do my best to hide the light stand. Usually,
I was just thinking.
Yeah, I mean it's usually like against a tree or like a lamp post or. I'm trying to think of where I hid it that time. I think it was actually out in the open, but it was so dark that you couldn't tell it was there. Or if you did see it, you wouldn't really know what it was. So I just, wirelessly trigger those flashes. And I light the couple. Obviously, she knows what's happening, or he knows what's happening as soon as the first flash goes off. But that's really the only way to handle shooting in a situation where it's complete darkness. Worst case, you can use on-camera flash, which I prefer not to do. But if you're really in a pinch and you don't have light stands, you don't have the capability for remotely controlling your flashes, on-camera flash will do the trick. As long as you expose for the ambient in the background. Otherwise, you just have bright white couple, and it looks like they're in a big black dark room because you can't.
Yeah.
There's no context. But yeah, my favorite method for that is off-camera flash.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of preparation for that, though. You have to be there early. You have to set up the camera and the lights in the proper position, and then you have to test the exposure, with yourself, or if you have an assistant, you test the exposure, and then you have to hope that they end up in the precise spot you picked. That where you set the exposure, you set the spot to expose properly. Because if they're too close to the lights, they're going to be overexposed. If they're too far away, they're going to be underexposed. Obviously, if they're underexposed, it's not as a big deal if they're overexposed. But logistically, it's risky just because you don't necessarily know they're going to be in the exact spot that you planned for them to be in.
You mean you don't mark it like they do when you hit your mark on like in theater or something, where you put like a big piece of blue painter's tape on the ground?
I mean, at nighttime, that doesn't work very well, unless it was the glowing tape strips, but that's super obvious.
Which nobody wants in their photos either. I'm totally kidding.
So in general, I recommend heavily against like nighttime shots unless they want to have them at a memorial or monument that has some lighting.
Yeah.
And I tell them why. And if they still really want to do it, we make it work. But I tell them the downsides so they can set their expectations accordingly.
Yeah, it's important to think about what it is that your goals are. If you really want to surprise that person, then having that flash go off like as soon as they arrive on scene
Yeah.
is, so you have to think about what your exact priorities are and what makes most sense for you as a couple. If that is the only time that you can make it work, then that's the only time you can make it work. But if you have flexibility, I agree with all of the things you're saying.
Or
Um,
at least like right after the sunset in the blue hour where you still have light, some very minimal light, but you can work with that. You just
yeah.
can't. It's hard to work with complete, darkness at 10 p.m.
And it does change in the winter. It is significantly darker in general,
Hmm.
at least here in DC, versus in the summer, you're going to have the sunset takes a lot longer. It takes longer to go down. And that's another reason that it's important to have that conversation with your photographer, if you're hiring a professional, and talk about like what your options are in terms of timing, because we know what sunset means and we know what lighting means when we're going into any sort of session, whether that be like send a sparkler send off is going to have the same kind of thing where you have to set up the
Yeah, they want to have a sparkler send off at like 3 p.m. And it's like, well, why even have sparklers? If you're going to do a send off at 3 p.m., get like rice or like something colorful because the sparklers just aren't going to work.
biodegradable confetti is a good
Yeah,
one too.
sparklers just don't work at 3 p.m. Sparklers don't work, you know, in the golden hour. You have to wait until it's dark before the sparklers really pop.
Yeah. And again, this is for wedding. I'm guessing most people don't have sparkler send offs at their proposal, although not a bad
I've
idea.
never had
Um,
one of those yet.
I've never seen one of those. Not a bad idea if you're looking to do something really interesting. Sparklers always make me nervous because there's so much hairspray and so many flammable things at weddings
Yeah,
that I'm just like, oh, please keep that away from her hair or like his hair. There's like everyone's got
yeah.
spray and
And who's responsible for the sparklers? Is it the venue? Is it like whichever vendor brought them? Like, is it the planner's fault or is it the makeup artist's fault for using hairspray? You never know.
ooh, that's a good question. I don't
That's
know.
why.
I would assume it goes under the venue's insurance. That would be my gut. But if something were to really happen and they were to sue people, I don't know how far they could sue out.
Well, that's why everyone has liability insurance.
Yes. Well,
Yeah, I've never had anyone catch on fire from a sparkler exit. So
I haven't either. It's just one of those weird fears that will
yeah,
always be in my heart whenever it
yeah, it probably is completely like very unlikely to ever happen. But it's
Yeah.
we both think of these things because we're kind of crazy.
Yeah, because we really care about the people that were around.
It's a mixture of that and just being overly uh,
Anxious and awesome.
anxious. Yes, yes. Considering all the possible permutations of bad things that could possibly happen.
And planning for them so that, emergencies are not quite so emergency-ish.
Exactly.
Um, and on that note, we are going to take a super fast break on the wedding dish. I will be right back with Chris Ferenzi of Chris Ferenzi Photography. And we are back on the wedding dish. I am Sarah Alapin, your hostess with the mostest. And I have with me today Chris Ferenzi, the photographer behind Chris Ferenzi Photography. And he is dishing with us all about proposals, how to plan for them, best practices. And now we're going to roll into logistics, how to actually plan your surprise proposal. So tell us, Chris, how do you do it?
Well, after the initial email communication and the signing of the contract, one of the first things that I ask for are photos of the two of them. And I ask for multiple photos in multiple situations, both photos of them together in the same shot and shots of them separately, because as everyone knows, you look different in different pictures. Some people look completely unlike what they look like in real life in, the picture. So just having a variety of pictures, gives me a good idea of what they actually look like, because knowing what they
Some
look like is.
people Yeah,
Go ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Some people
No,
change
it's
their
all good.
hair, like me, I constantly change my hair.
Hmm.
Um, some people send you photos that they think they look good in, but it isn't
Yeah.
actually a representation of, or it was a positive experience, but it's not a representation of what they look like. Go ahead. I didn't
I,
mean to interrupt you.
in my experience, if I get 5 pictures of someone, and 4 of them, they look the same, like they look like the same person in 4 of them. And in the fifth shot, they look slightly different than the other 4 shots. The fifth shot is always what they look like.
Interesting.
So it's probably the same for dating websites, but like you want to look for the picture that stands out, not in a negative way, but just in a different way. That's inconsistent with the rest of them, and that's usually what they end up looking like, which is amusing to me. But regardless, knowing what people look like is very important, because even when I've been doing proposals on the National Mall, sometimes there are other proposals going on at the same time, and photographing the wrong couple would be disastrous.
Did you hear about the photographer that it was like in over some canyon on like a
Yeah,
point? You heard about this story?
yeah, and somewhere where you never thought there'd be 2 proposals, but
No, at the
there were two.
same
Yeah,
time. And the photographer photographed the wrong proposal. There was no service there. The couple ran late. And then the photographer was gone by the time the couple got there because they didn't communicate to the photographer they were running late. And someone else proposed at the exact same spot at the exact same time when it should have happened.
yeah. Yeah, well, that's why you need to communicate. If you're going to be like out of cell service, you need to make sure you have a plan in place, an exact time, um, and an exact location for your proposal. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
one
And
of
you
the
need to
meth
have
Mhm,
contingency plans in place too.
exactly. Yeah, that's part of my planning process as well. But like going back to the date and time, the date usually is a fixed date based on their schedule. So if it has to be it might have to be a certain day. So we have to work that day and time. Also, is contingent on their plans. But you need to lock down the date immediately, and then lock down the time. I give them. I like to lock down the time within a week of the proposal, so that's usually when you have a better idea of when dinner is going to be, for example, or when you're going out afterwards, and just the general schedule for the day. So pick a date and time, and then you need to pick a location, which I make super easy with my list of top places to propose in Washington D.C. It's just a list of all the places I've done proposals, and a little mini review of what I think about them and the upsides and downsides of those particular spots. Um, and once the location is selected, in conjunction with them, I pick a very specific spot. Like I'll send them a Google Maps pin with the exact GPS location of where they need to be. I also send marked up diagrams and maps showing exactly where they need to be, where I'll be, so they know, so they can see that I'm actually there before they propose, which is also part of the process to make eye contact with me. Not like flirty eye contact,
Like,
but just
ooh,
and
eyebrows
yeah,
raised.
just regular eye contact. Like, hey, I see you, and you see me. We're good for the proposal. So I have them do that after they get to the exact spot that we agreed on. And again, I make it super simple to get to that spot, because I give them multiple diagrams, multiple angles, um, to show which way they'll be facing, where they'll be relative to various other parts of wherever they're getting proposed, wherever they're doing the proposal. So that is a big part of the process, the logistics, just locking in the exact, precise, super, precise GPS location. Um, so everything is perfectly, laid out. And then the night of or the day of, coordination is super key. I have them text me when they leave their apartment or house or wherever they're coming from. I have them text me when they're like 5 minutes away from the location. I have them text me. Well, I have one of them text me. Who's ever doing their proposing, text me when they arrive on site, and then at that point, the eye contact happens, and then I tell them they can propose anytime after that because I'll be ready. So that coordination the day of, and the minutes leading up to the actual proposal is super, super important to ensure that the proposal is captured.
Yeah, definitely. And
And
that it's
something,
not like,
mhm,
hectic and chaotic and
yeah.
there's no like weird energy or anything.
One time, actually, I was doing a proposal, and it was in the early morning, maybe like 8 a.m., which I'm usually not awake at that time, but I woke up early for the client. But yeah, we had a spot picked out. I had the GPS spot, had the maps and the diagram showing exactly where they would be on the steps of the Lincoln. And I get there like 15, 20 minutes early. I got there, and there was like 200 people doing like CrossFit on the steps of the National Mall, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And I'm like, well, this is entirely unexpected. So I quickly, I freaked out for about 30 seconds. And then I was like, okay, let's see what we can do here. I went around and I went up, 2 or 3 levels of steps. They were down near the tidal basin, not the tidal basin, the reflecting pool. I always mix those two up. Down near the reflecting pool, and so I went up closer to the top of the monument, but I had to convey that to the guy, in the space of 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So he went to the correct spot. Um, so I snapped some pictures. I used the little markup tool in the iPhone Photos app, and I drew a quick, really messy diagram with a huge red X and just like arrows. It was coherent enough that it could make sense as to they would where he would go to propose, and that worked. We texted back and forth frantically. I sent diagrams and I described the position, precisely. I was like, okay, you're going to want to be 50 feet from the concrete pylon on the third tier of stairs up towards the Lincoln, and I had the picture and the diagram, and it worked out good, and we ended up successfully capturing the proposal. So these sort of things happen. That's why I show up early.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super important. And you never know what's going to like be weird in DC. It could always be like a weird road closure or a motorcade can go by and
Yeah,
stop you
or
for like,
protest. A lot of
yeah,
protests, demonstrations, especially at the monuments. There's always, not always, but there's demonstrations and protests at monuments relatively frequently. Um,
yeah,
so you just have to make sure, if you as a photographer are there early, to make sure
yeah.
that can work around it, have enough time to work around it.
Yeah, that's super important because, it shouldn't be on the couple or whoever the person is that's planning the surprise to make those accommodations and have to think on their feet if there's a way, around that's one of the reasons you hire a photographer so that
Yeah.
you essentially don't have to worry on that day.
And of course, I mean, the contingency, if there's an issue and the contingency plan doesn't actually work out, you as a photographer just have to be, on your feet, ready to move around, just watch them like a hawk, and wherever they walk, regardless of whether or not it's the spot you told them to walk to, wherever they walk, just make sure you're in a position to capture the proposal um, with something nice in the background. um,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that's it's
definitely.
that's why you don't want to hire a friend again to do these sorts of things, because I mean, I just went over like 15 minutes worth of logistics and planning. Your friend's not going to know any of that, and you're going to get a really bad picture.
Yeah, and I mean if pictures aren't your priority, then I totally get it, but if
Mhm.
you do want it captured, and I guess that leads into my next question, why bring a photographer? Why hire a photographer for your proposal?
Sort of goes back to the personality type. um, if you're the kind of person super excited by the idea of, like, a public display of the celebration, then you'd want someone to capture it because you want to document it in the nicest way possible. Um, and the most comprehensive way possible, so you can look back and remember it, since it was obviously it's such an important moment in your mind. Some people just propose to each other, like they're sitting on the couch. It's like, hey, let's get married, and like, okay, that sounds cool. You don't need photos of that. Well, you might, but
You
generally
might.
you don't want to get a photographer for that. But if you're in public and you have a setup like a picnic, or it's a special a date night, it's something you planned it out, like a romantic moment, it's good to have pictures of it, to capture, just the emotion of the day, because you're not going to remember it. Um, Most of the time, the person who's proposing tells me they don't remember doing the photo shoot afterwards. Like 15 minutes of photos, it's just like a blur, because their like adrenaline is pumping through their body, and it's just like, okay, well, I'm glad we got pictures, because I didn't remember any of it, except for the one part where I was like, "Will you marry me?"
Yeah,
So
I don't remember what Philippe said to me.
yeah, but unfortunately, I don't capture audio, so you won't know what they said, but you'll see them. You'll see pictures of the reaction to what was being said. Although I
Yeah.
should maybe join up with the videographer and do like a video package.
It's not a bad idea because it is something, a lot of people say they kind of like leave they a lot of people say they leave their body. Um, it's just such an odd
Not
thing to say,
Yeah,
but
because usually you say that in like a very negative situation, like
yeah,
a
it's
near death
but like your mind
experience.
goes like you just lose all memory of it in a lot of circumstances. And it is funny. People say they leave their body. It's like their brain shuts off and they're kind of so in the moment that they don't retain the moment afterwards. So
Yeah.
having a video is definitely, that actually might be, honestly, that probably would be a time that I would choose video over at the proposal over at the wedding
hmm
if
Yeah,
I
that's a good point.
had a budgetary concern because we didn't do personal vows or anything. We didn't need. I mean, although I wouldn't have wanted. I'm very private about. I'm sure this is shocking to you, Chris, as I sit here podcasting to
Yes.
the masses, but we're actually very private people. So I wouldn't have wanted ours photographed. Also, I made the worst face ever. I was like jaw dropped, like staring at him with like the weird, terrified eyes because I was just so confused when he
Yeah.
proposed.
Well, yeah. I mean, going back to like how like why you should propose in public or not, you have to know your partner. Like if you don't know your partner well enough to know whether or not they'll be excited or terrified of having a proposal in public, then you probably shouldn't be proposing to them just yet.
Yeah, maybe
You
take
should
a
probably
beat on that.
Yeah, you should probably know a little more about how they'd react in that situation, because you don't want to have to propose to someone and then they just freeze. And
Yeah, which is
yeah,
totally what I would have done.
it never happened. I've done over 100 proposals. I think this year I've been averaging 5 or 6 a month, which is a lot. Um, but yeah,
That's a lot.
yeah, it definitely is. I just completely lost my train of thought. Um, anyway, you can continue with your questioning.
So okay, let's assume you know whether or not you two it works for you as a couple to have a photographer. Um, how do you choose the right photographer for you? What are some of the key
Um,
points when you're looking at someone's portfolio and or communicating with them?
I mean, in terms of picking a photographer, it's just like picking a photographer for anything else. You have to one like their style, which is,
Yeah.
I mean, I won't say it's probably like it's not most important. It's probably half as important. I mean, there's important parts of choosing a photographer. One is their personality. Two is the style. If you like their style but hate their personality, you're not going to have a good time.
Yeah.
If you love their personality and they're a horrible photographer, you're not going to have a good time. So you have to
Or
look.
you'll regret it later
Yes,
when you see the
exactly.
photos.
Yes. So I mean, it's just like choosing a photographer for a wedding. You want to like their style, um, and you want to you want to know that you'll be comfortable with them, and you want to know you'll be comfortable with having them at such an important moment, at such a pivotal moment of their relationship. You don't just want some dude or chick, just kind of there, if you don't know how they work and how they think about the proposal. Um, let's see.
And in terms of like communication and things, like
Mhm.
you've been going through, I send them a map, I send them
Yeah.
like this and that and all those things. How um what would be some things that would help people determine whether or not they need that level of expertise versus somebody who's just going to show up and shoot?
Um, well, in my opinion, you need that level. Everyone needs that level of expertise, whether or not they know it.
I
Um,
agree.
you, if you're proposing to someone, you don't want to leave anything up to chance. And if you're gonna hire a photographer for a couple $100, and you want to be sure that they're going to capture it, you obviously are at the point where at some level a friend's not going to do the capturing effectively, so you're hiring a photographer. So make sure you hire a photographer who knows what they're doing and who has you know a deep knowledge of the process. I mean, because like I said,
Yeah.
I've done 100 of these things. I add to my process pretty much every time I do a shoot. Something I think of something new, and I add it to my how-to guide that I send to all my clients on the process of the logistics of doing the proposal. Um, for example, recently, well, um, I had two couples recently who I shot the proposal, but the person they were proposing to was not looking towards the camera, so I didn't capture their facial reactions, and the person proposing was displeased that I did not capture their facial reactions, um, which is understandable, but at the same time, that's completely out of my control for many reasons. I can't just like yell, "Hey, turn around, face me." Um, so now, as part of my process, I draw on my diagrams. I clearly indicate lines of sight, and I tell them, okay, you need to make sure that her or his back is to the monument, and your back is to me. You need to have that happen. Otherwise, I cannot guarantee I will get their facial expression, which is important. And I make it abundantly clear that that's the only way to ensure that I get the facial reaction. And I even put that in my contract and bolded it just because I want to make it super abundantly clear. This must be one of your highest considerations if you care about capturing their facial expression, which most people do.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like there's so many things that are out of control. If the fate, you can't jump in the water,
Yeah.
and
I mean, I
um, y-
understand it's a very stressful moment, and I probably wouldn't be able to remember anything someone told me in that moment. Um, but if there's one thing I try to stress to people is that to remember in that stressful situation is just make sure they're facing me or at least sideways to me, as long as their back's not to me.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and another consideration in that is that oftentimes your photographer is using a telephoto lens
Hmm.
because they don't want to be part of your moment. They want to
Yeah.
capture your moment, and you don't want them up in your space. So it for them to then run to another location, they can miss that whole moment
Yeah.
because it is a larger arc.
Oh yeah,
So
definitely. If you're on your knee for 10 seconds, there's absolutely no way I could get to another spot, um, which would capture the other person's reaction to the
yeah,
proposal.
yeah. Yeah, I totally am with you.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
I was upset that I didn't capture their facial expression, and like I said, it's understandable in those two situations that they weren't entirely pleased that I didn't capture the facial expression. But it's a proposal. I make it abundantly clear that everything is not not everything's up to chance, but there's a good portion of the logistical planning that stresses that even though there's logistical planning, a lot of this is left up to chance, and we have to just sort of accept that.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of variables, and that's one of the reasons that you hire somebody that I would encourage everyone listening to hire somebody who has that level of expertise and that thorough, who is that thorough, so that the moment goes as smoothly as possible. So you don't have to think about it when it's happening. You already are on autopilot, knowing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, moving parts and variables is a way better way of saying it than how I said it. So I'm glad that you said that.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for being here and joining me on the wedding dish today. How can people find you online?
They can check out my website at chrisferenzi.com. For the spelling, just look in the show notes because it's hard to spell. People always misspell it, and if I spell it out loud, you'll mistake the N for an M or the Z for a C. So just look at the show notes, or you can go to my Instagram at Chris Delta, just Chris and then DELTA. It has nothing to do with the Delta variant. Um,
I thought of that the other day.
I've had that name, that screen name, since like 1996, and it's based off Star Trek Voyager because of course it is, because they were in the Delta Quadrant of
Yep,
the galaxy, so hence Chris Delta. But now it's sort of taken on a new meaning, which is unfortunate. But
I know, I know.
I'm just gonna hope it I can weather the storm with my screen name, which is one of the most important things, right?
Oh, yes, of course. That is of
Yeah.
utmost importance. Yes, and I would definitely check Chris's Instagram out, check out his website. He is a super talented photographer. He's one of my favorite people to work with. He's also one of the people that I love receiving his preview photos that he sends me because we share, we're friends. So we share some of our favorite photos from different things that we do, and I just love it because it's always something different and cool and really unique, and it's very inspiring.
Well, that's
He's
so
like,
nice of
I
you.
didn't expect that.
I like being inspiring.
I really shocked you on that, didn't I?
You did.
I kind of wish you all could see his face. He was a little bit like I hit him with a sock with a tennis ball in it or something.
Yeah, I've never thought of myself as inspiring, but I'll take it.
Well, you gotta, because I said it.
There we go.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for being here. It's always such a pleasure to have you. And I appreciate all of you tuning into the wedding dish today. And if you would like to give us a follow on Instagram, you'll see some of Chris's awesome photos on there at the Wedding Dish Podcast. And you can visit our website, theweddingdishpodcast.com, to read our show notes, apply to be a guest on the show. You can donate so that we can keep bringing you juicy wedding tips and tricks from couples and wedding pros alike. And you can get the transcripts from this episode because we are committed to accessibility. And don't forget to tune in next week. We have another amazing wedding story that we're talking about. And until then, cheers, everybody.